Hello, friends. If you've been studying writer advice for any amount of time, you will be familiar with a lot of common advice, such as every scene needs to advance the plot, every character needs a purpose, the writing advice that basically keeps you on track so that you don't meander around without a purpose in your writing. And I don't even necessarily 100% completely agree with this advice, and I've talked about that in other videos, but today we're going to actually kind of run with that and expand upon it in a way that I don't see talked about as much, and it was something that I was just realizing recently. Been thinking about kind of an additional layer to the idea that a scene needs to advance the plot or a character needs to have a reason for existing in the book, and that is that it's not just you, the author, that needs to know the purpose, but the audience needs to know the purpose to a certain extent. Now, I know what you're thinking, well, the audience isn't supposed to know everything, every reason everything happens, because they're going to be surprised. They're going to find out later. So they just need to keep reading. That is true, but there is a certain type of writing that tips you, the audience, off to oh yeah, I want to know what's going to happen, versus a scene where you're just I'm not sure where you're going with this. To some extent, the audience needs to be told how to think. And I know in a way that sounds bad, because part of what a great book often does is make you not sure what to think. Maybe you ponder the theme. Is this thing really true, or actually is it like this? Or was that character really a villain? Maybe they were actually the hero all along. A good piece of literature often makes you question things. It doesn't tell you what to think. I'm not talking about that type of knowing what to think. I'm talking more about the little tip-offs that let you know that this book is going to be worth pursuing and steer you in the right direction as you're reading, to keep you invested. Now, if you've ever had a critique, you may be familiar with critiques that say things like, am I supposed to like this character? I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to like them or not. I'm a little confused as to the purpose of this magical training, because it seems like she already kind of knew the stuff before, but then there's this part, and I'm not sure where things are going with this friend. There's that kind of feedback. You may also know feedback like this: oh wow, I am so curious to know what's up with the friend. What is her deal? Or, I bet the villain is actually going to turn out to be the good guy. And generally, you want the kind of feedback like the latter, where the person is they're kind of speculating, they want to know, they're so curious, where is this going? They're not sure, but is there going to be a secret with that? Or oh, I bet that's the kind of thing that gets people invested to keep reading and know, oh, how's that going to pan out? I don't know, but I got to find out. The other type, although it is equally unsure, it's more confused and lost, and you don't want that. You don't want your reader to be questioning I'm not really sure, why is this scene here? And then you as the writer might be well, it'll make sense when you get to chapter 12. You're going to find out that she was actually learning this in that training sequence, and the thing with her friend, it's just, you got to keep reading. You can make excuses all day, but when somebody picks up your book and you're not there to tell them keep reading, well, they're just going to put it down. That's going to be the end of it. So ideally, you got to hold their hand from afar, from within the pages of the book, and say, no, stay with me. Got to keep reading. When you're in the hands of an experienced author, you may not even be conscious of the way you're being guided through the narrative, but when it's gone, and when you're in the hands of a less experienced writer, suddenly you're very conscious of, oh, that sense that I trusted where this is going, it is not present in this book. You just don't feel rooted in the moments in the same way. So how do you fix this? Well, that is a more complicated question, because in a lot of ways, this is getting to some pretty intuitive stuff that is hard. It's not your really basic writing advice that's just so obvious. This is getting into more subtle stuff. But I tried my best to break down some reasons that I think manuscripts don't always hit in the right way. And if you are at that point where you're getting more serious about your writing, or maybe you're even starting to publish or thinking seriously about publication, I do want to let you guys know about InkersCon 2026. It runs from May 30th to June 12th, and I've been watching last year's panels. I just watched Steph Green's panel a few days ago, and I'm still thinking about it. It was so good. I related a lot to the trajectory of kind of trying different things. Some of them work better than others. A lot of the tips she had about things she's learned along the way, like really inspiring as far as like long-term success and what that can look like when a book doesn't hit right away. I really feel like InkersCon is something I can recommend with confidence because I'm just personally getting a lot out of it. I feel like it's a really good value for the money if you're at that point where you're just ready to kind of see what a professional career in writing looks like. And if you sign up, you get 24 classes on writing, marketing, advertising, business. You also get roundtable discussions and Q&As, and you get access to them for 6 years, so you can go back and refer to them in the future. Best of all, I have a $50 coupon code for you guys. So the conference is only $199. Use my code CozyCreative26 at checkout. You can find the link in the comments. It also really helps support the channel, and let me know how it went if you go. So what can you do to achieve this effect in your own writing? One thing I just want to mention is that I think modern audiences as a whole, we're not talking individual readers who are all very different, but just modern audiences as a whole like more hand-holding than readers did in the past before our era of distraction. A lot of people are reading books on their phones with a lot of distractions going on. So I think people are just more tolerant and even eager to have their hand held and have things kind of, a little more in your face than writing in the past. When I first started writing, I always just tried to be as subtle as possible and felt like a real failure if I wasn't. But nowadays, sometimes it's like, well, you don't want to be too subtle because people just aren't paying as much attention. So that's a factor to consider, unfortunately. But this is the world we live in. First thing to consider is that you need to know the purpose of every scene and every line and every character in your book. And this is something that it's a lot to struggle with when you're new to writing because that's a lot. It's a lot to kind of keep accounted for. But really, when your manuscript is done, an editor should be able to pick through it and ask you, grill you. Why is this character here? What do they bring to the story? This line, why is it here? She tossed her hair. Why? Why is this here right now? What is this saying? Every aspect of a book should have a reason for being there. That does not mean that every scene needs to be this big wowie zowie conflict, craziness, big things happening. As I've talked about in some other videos, that was kind of one of my more when I was sort of professional, amateur to professional transition period. I had really removed a lot of the boredom from my work, and everything had a purpose, and everything was a lean, mean manuscript, but it was a little too lean and mean in the end. I had stripped out too much of the personality from the books that I was writing at that point. They did well, and I'm still proud of them. But when I look back, they feel a little too short and a little too thin compared to what I'm doing nowadays, because I wasn't confident enough in what was interesting and what was boring to put some of the more subtle, quiet stuff on the page. Like my debut novel, it was a young adult novel that was published by Bloomsbury, Magic Under Glass. And there was this one chapter in what was otherwise a pretty briskly paced, plot-driven book. But there was this one short chapter where the main character is mostly just kind of being introspective. Not a lot happens in it. My editor was like, why is this here? Just cut it. And I did. I didn't question that at all. But when I look back, that chapter is one of the only regrets that I have about the book. Maybe as it was in its present form, it was a little too slow and not enough happening. But I wish I had not just cut it, because I feel like that book didn't have enough room to breathe. It didn't give the reader enough time to really get invested in the characters in the world. There just weren't very many of those moments where things just kind of slowed down for a minute and you really got into the depths of the characters. It was a fairly short book. So I do want to say that when you're cutting these things and you're like thinking about what has purpose and what doesn't, it doesn't have to be like a huge, like world shaking purpose for being there, but there just needs to be something. Like this action beat is here because like I really need to control the flow of dialogue. There's a pause here and I needed to put something there to like preserve the rhythm of dialogue. It's a common mistake I see people make, that their dialogue has just too many physical things going on. It's like people feel like they can't let the dialogue stand on its own, that they have to always be saying how the characters are moving and interacting with each other in the scene. What are their hands doing? What is their hair doing? How are they moving? It's a great temptation of many writers to add too much of that, and it doesn't add anything. And if you cut it out, it doesn't take anything away to cut it out. These are the little ways that you can kind of direct your reader into what is really important, because once you start cutting out all the stuff that's not important, it leaves behind what really is important, and the reader focuses in on that more, the more that you cut out the nonsense. But what you might want to leave in occasionally is just some fun little banter, introspective moment that the character has that like isn't going to change the book immensely, but adds to the sense of their character, a little more description of the scene that makes it more immersive. You don't want to cut out all that stuff. That's the kind of thing I cut out too often when I was a beginner, because I was afraid it would be boring, and I think that I wasn't giving myself enough credit sometimes for keeping some of that in. Now, another thing to really consider is that your showing and your telling need to align with each other. We've talked a little bit about show, don't tell, and how I don't think that's always the best advice, because sometimes you do want to tell. Especially, again, as readers are getting more distracted, I think we're actually going back to telling being a little more acceptable. I'd be careful with it. You can definitely tell too much, but I think that sometimes it's okay to tell. Like if you're setting a scene, if you're setting up some world building, or you're just kind of like clarifying, like sometimes if you've shown the characters a lot, occasionally you almost want like the like little recap to like cement in the reader's brain, like this is the kind of person they are, this is how they are. But you do want to make sure that when you say those things, when you tell, they match what you showed, because this is where the reader can sometimes get a little lost. Where are you trying to direct me? Where are you trying to send my feelings? Because you told me this character was really strong, but she's being kind of wimpy and whiny. Or you told me that the character's, dead father was this great dad, but then the flashback, he's kind of strict and, he might have been a good dad, but like, I'm not really getting that out of this scene. So be mindful of what you tell your audience. Is it true? And if you always say that this character is the most wonderful, loyal friend, do their actual actions match that or not? Another thing to be mindful of is to direct the audience's attention to the things that you want them to pay attention to, and not the things that you don't want them to pay attention to. Audiences are often more attuned to small hints than we give them credit for, and their attention will latch on to small things and it will go where you put your attention. So sometimes when you have a weak spot in a book, your compulsion might be to add more of that thing. Like, I'm very weak on the descriptions. I'm just not very good at imagining this place. So I'm really going to work on it and like work hard to really beef up that description. Sometimes you'd want to do the opposite and just not focus on the things that you're bad at. Or an even more accurate example is when, let's say you got a little wonky world building in your fantasy world, or you decided to write a romance about a mob boss. You decided to jump on the mafia romance trend or the hockey romance trend, but you don't know anything about running a mob operation or being a hockey player. And that fantasy system that you created for your book, it does not make that much sense if you really dig into it. For years, my instinct when this would happen to me, if I would realize that my world building was a little like, don't pay too much attention to it, but instead of ignoring it or like diminishing its focus, or if some aspect of world building was a little like, don't overanalyze how that works. My instinct would be to like really try to work out a logical explanation for it. Like, I'm going to twist myself in a pretzel to explain to you why this actually does make sense, because I want to make sure that the nerdiest reader out there, if they ask me, well, why is this magic? Why is this work and this doesn't? That I'm like, well, if you read page 126, I actually have an explanation that it's like because of the God wheel. But over the years, I've realized people, most readers only pay attention to where you direct their attention. So if you have a big old explanation of something that doesn't really work, they will notice it more than if you just don't engage with it very much. It was after I published my novel Dark Metropolis, or was it Glittering Shadows? It was either book 1 or book 2. After it was published, I realized that there was this really impossible part of the timeline. It would not work. If my editor or copy editor had noticed this, or if I had noticed this, we would have been in trouble. But I didn't notice it, so I didn't even try to explain it. I didn't draw any attention to it, and no one's ever noticed it. If you read them now, maybe you will, but that was a good example of people they gloss over stuff if you don't really draw too much attention to it. And similarly, if you're writing romance and the focus is supposed to be a romance, how hot this guy is, this amazing rapport that the characters have, it's always good to do research. Of course, I'm a big fan of research, but there is a point where it's like, you maybe just don't want to focus too hard on the thing that you don't know anything about, especially if like you're writing like a right to market book, you're trying to do it at like a timely fashion, and you know that everyone reading it they're there for the romance. They're not there for like the exact details of how like an actual organized crime outfit runs. So relax a little bit. Another thing to bear in mind is don't let characters just sit there. This is related to how every character needs a purpose, but a little different, because you might be like, okay, my character needs a best friend. The character's best friend is going to be supportive. They're going to help them through the thing that happens in chapter 27. So they have a purpose. They're the best friend, they're supportive, and they help them through this event. But sometimes these characters that are there to fulfill a certain plot purpose just kind of sit there. And as a reader, your mind kind of goes, oh, here's the best friend character. She's here to do the best friend thing. But she just doesn't have a lot of reason to be there beyond being the best friend. This is where you can turn that reader feedback of like, is something going to happen with the best friend? Am I supposed to like the best friend? She's like a little bit annoying though. Is she going to I don't know, is she going to turn on the main character later? Like what's her deal? Or just kind of checking out, like, oh, it's another scene. She's hanging out with the best friend, whatever. You want the reaction that's more like, oh my God, I love the best friend. Is she going to get her own book later? Are you going to do a sequel with her? And is she going to be like part of this plot line? Does she have a secret? You want characters to have an intriguing reason to be there, not just to be there because the character needs a best friend, the character needs a dead parent, the character needs an antagonist. Oftentimes, the more you think about like making a character compelling in some way, that's what directs the reader to understand, oh, I need to stick with this. This is really going somewhere. And on a very similar note, you want to provoke a reaction in the audience with every scene, every character. A lot of times books that just don't quite hit and start to lose the interest of the audience, it's because you just didn't quite elevate a scene or a character or a place, and it's not having any kind of impact. Even when you have a little side character that doesn't have a whole lot to do, it's worth thinking about, can I do anything to leave more of an impact on the audience from this scene? Or maybe it's not so much the actual character as how something about them affects the main characters. This is something I've been thinking about a lot because my potion dealer series, a lot of what it deals with is recruiting different potion makers and sorcerers and dealing with like the people in the potion making and selling business. So there's a lot of these characters that pop up that they don't need to be important. I don't want people to love them in the way that they're like, oh, I want this character to be part of the regular cast. But by the same token, I want them all to feel distinct and make an impact. So I've been thinking about this a lot and trying to just think about the ways that an interaction with a side character can like reflect on main character, make them think about something that they weren't thinking about before, or they introduce a new little intriguing plot point, mystery, secret, something like that. Or they can bring a little bit of a minor side character relationship into the plot in some cases, where you want them to bring just a little something like I'm missing a little bit of this energy in the book, and this character gives me a chance to bring a little bit of that in. Because ultimately, you don't need the reader to think that every side character and every setting and so on is important. But you do want the reader to come away with the sense that the story as a whole and your main character was important. And sometimes it's like a little bit of like a reflecting spell where you want the settings and the side characters to like reflect something on your main character to make them seem more interesting, like they're changing, growing, they are more important, and you have to know what happens to them. So those are some of my best thoughts on the topic. And like I said, this is a concept that took me a very long time to realize. It's kind of one of those little subtle things that runs in the background that you don't realize it almost until you've gotten way better at it, and then you kind of look back at your old work and go, oh, okay, I understand now why the audience didn't quite get what I was trying to do. And it's also not something I'm ever gonna master. There's always gonna be moments where the audience, what they're getting out of my work and what I think I'm delivering, I don't think those things are ever going to align perfectly, especially because readers also bring different perspectives to the table. But those are just some of the things that I thought of that I think are worth considering when you're writing, and just the very idea of bearing in mind guiding your audience's perception through the book, that even if the book is written in like first person, you are still the unseen hand steering them to what they're going to pay attention to, and you want to use that power wisely. If you have any other tips related to this or any thoughts, I would certainly love to hear them. I hope it was helpful. If you're new here, my name is Lydia Foxglove, and I'm a fantasy author who's been making her living as a creative since 2009. So don't forget to subscribe if that sounds good to you. I'm getting very close to 25,000, so I would love to hit that big old quarter of a plaque. It's kind of too bad YouTube doesn't break the plaque up into 4 pieces, like one of those like collectible things where you have to like assemble. That would be more fun. I would love to have just like a quarter of a YouTube plaque sitting back there. If you like more from me, my subscribers get 2 bonus videos every month voted on by you guys. There's quite a backlog of them by now. If you want to check those out, they're available on Patreon, Substack, and YouTube memberships. And if you'd like to read any of my books, there's a link in the description. The Hidden Lands books are the ones I always recommend first because those are the ones of my heart. And don't forget to check out InkersCon with my code CozyCreative26. I post every Sunday and sometimes also midweek, and I thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye!